So it is Thursday the 13th of March tonight, or early tomorrow morning, or depending on where you are in the world. We've got that lunar eclipse. I always remember these eclipses only because the FTX sell-off in 2022, which was really nasty, bottomed on an eclipse. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen this time, but it was always a bit of a surprise shakeout, and I really feel like the way these markets are at the moment, we are very vulnerable to surprises, and they are coming at us fast. So I think it's also at this point, as I explained in my video about stocks, I think that as we head into options expiration week, whether we just go sideways or whether we have a shakeout today and tomorrow, I think it's likely to try a bounce into options expiration week for a week or so. And the question is going to be whether we should buy the dip or sell the rally. And I really do think as traders we should be doing both and riding the waves. You know, at the moment this is a very difficult market for long-term buy and hold investors, but if you are a trader, it's quite interesting, let's put it that way. So let's talk about where we are in Bitcoin. Now, big picture, let's take everything off. We are at a very interesting place. As I said before, all the way from this November 2022 low, every time we made 5 waves up, we we made 5 waves up here, had a very nice pullback, 50%, and carried on from this low to this high, 5 waves up, pullback 50%, kept going higher. From this low that we made at the beginning of August last year, we've got 5 waves up, and we've pulled back exactly 50%. So we are at one of those levels where we are going to try a rally from here, and I think as we head into options expiration week, the key question for me is whether we're going to go a little bit lower than here or not. I've got lots of scribbles on this chart, so I apologize. If we continue lower, and we do have a little bit of a shakeout, the next clear support is, for me, is between 72,600 and 73,500. They're kind of messy fib levels, and that is also a little bit of a double top high from last March, where and which we retested in October. So pretty interesting support and resistance level. Also a big fib retrace level from that 22 last time we had an eclipse low. If we continue lower from here, I am going to be in the sell the rally camp. So in other words, I do think it's a great trade if we drop down to this 73,000 level, but for me that 87,000 level becomes pretty important resistance, and so I think we buy at the 73,000 zone for a sharp bouncy rally back to 87,000. If we can hold this 50% level and we don't get a really nasty shakeout here on the retest, and we can recover this daily 200 moving average, then a measured move back to 93,500 I think becomes more likely. So I put these levels on a chart that I posted, and here's the reason for these levels. We had trend resistance. If we look at this on an hourly chart, this previous swing high is always going to be trend resistance. You know, you consider if you're in a downtrend, you're making lower lows and lower highs. And so this was a big deal, trend resistance at 84,000, not just because of kind of hourly trend, but because of this daily 200 moving average. And we can see previously when we've gotten underneath the daily 200 moving average and come back and tried to retest it, the first time has always been a little bit of a knockback. So what you're looking for is, are you going to make a higher low and then break above it, in which case all looking good. You know, this is what we did here, and then we saw a really nice move. This is what we did here, nice pullback, and then we saw another leg higher. But it is a general rule that a big moving average like this, first time you come back and test it, you are going to see a little bit of a knockback, and that's what we're seeing. And it's either going to be a knockback and, you know, you can continue lower, or it's going to be a higher low, and then you've got that support resistance level at 80,000 in Bitcoin, and we're going to look to see if we can make a higher low and continue higher next week. for me, as I keep saying, this 80,000 level is pretty key for trend, and whether this is just a 50% pullback and we see a much bigger move higher. The correlation with the Nasdaq makes me nervous that riding underneath these bigger moving averages mean that we have more downside. But for me right now, in between this 84,000 and 80,000 level on a kind of daily close, weekly, more important, we think a weekly close, where we're at, and we're in a little bit of sideways. We are not yet in a bull market going higher again, and we won't be in one until we can at least recover this daily 200 moving average. The good news about this is at the moment it's still sloping higher, which does point to a bullish trend if we can recover it, and I think that we will see that bigger bounce next week if we can. But underneath 84,000 and this trend resistance, unfortunately, means the path of least resistance is lower, and if not, just sideways. And this is really kind of, I think, important for a kind of high tide to float all of the boats here in Bitcoin. And there is a very real risk, I think, that we continue lower to 73,000 for sure. If we lose 79,800 on the close, I think selling short-term bounces down to 73,000 is the most likely scenario from here. So let's take a look at some of these others. One of them, Ethereum, as we said before, is a pretty interesting fib retrace level, and all of the other fib retrace levels have produced really nice bounces, and this in Ethereum against the dollar comes from all-time lows to all-time highs. For me though, underneath this weekly 200 moving average makes ETH in a downtrend, and so this is a sell the rally on bounces. I think, every time we get a bounce, you can buy whatever you like, but as long as we stand in this weekly 200 moving average, which has really since 2022 been an important battleground for ETH, as long as we stand underneath that, I'm afraid I'm pretty bearish this one for a number of reasons. So if we can set up a bigger bounce, this will bounce too, and it will bounce to 2,500. Really important level. If we look at this on the daily, here we are sideways at this level. If we look at it on an hourly, are we making any kind of a bottom? We're holding this level pretty nice. We had a false break underneath it. Now we're holding it. This is one of those ones that could go either way, because I like this level as one of those levels where what would be bearish, for example, in ETH would be underneath 1,859 and it becoming resistance, right? That makes it a sell. That makes this level then quite an interesting level to buy against if you think we're going to see more upside or a bigger kind of corrective bounce. And I like levels where you know where you're wrong. So if we know that underneath and holding underneath 1,859 makes us wrong to be bullish ETH, then this is the lowest risk if you buy as close as possible to this level, because you know when you're wrong. If we start to see underneath here and holding underneath here, we know we're wrong, especially if we break these lows. So it's lower risk here for a bigger bounce in ETH, but it's not the bullish price action yet, unfortunately, that we want to see. It's still pretty choppy and sideways. Let's take a look at some other charts that don't look so horrible. I have to say one of them is Ripple. Now, I don't know why Ripple is outperforming. I'm not going to argue with why, but it certainly is. If we look at this on a weekly, not only are we nowhere near the weekly 200 moving average in this one, but we're holding this weekly 20 moving average pretty nicely in terms of trend. This is a pretty nice look. We're holding the lows from December, and these are very three-wave corrective moves in Ripple. Now, when we bounced here at the beginning of February, we made a three-wave equal measured move in Ripple, which told us this was not a new upswing that was going to take us to new highs. it meant that we had another leg lower before we did that. So if we measured another leg lower, so if we measure from this high to low, there's our corrective bounce, we are holding the 61.8. So we could argue in terms that this is a correction where we've gone A, B, C, or three waves, or X, Y, Z, and this third leg is 61.8 of the first leg, and here we are bouncing pretty nicely from it. If we can get above these moving averages which are holding us down today at the moment, then this whole correction that we started in January in Ripple has more upside. We could also argue, you know, that we are in a consolidation pattern, but this is a much more bullish consolidation pattern than a lot of other crypto charts that I look at. Now, if we continue lower from here, which we could very easily do, we could be making, you know, quite often you can draw it as a bullish pennant, and instead of breaking out, you know, it turns into a kind of, it's a bullish pennant, and if we make another swing lower, it ends up being a bit of bear bullish flag instead. So a dip down to this daily 200 moving average is pretty interesting support if we get a shakeout and we hold it. So if I was watching Ripple and we get a nasty shakeout at the end of this week, I would look for this to find support from here and then get above this level again and a false breakdown. There is nothing, I don't think, more powerful than a false breakdown. So it's not a bullish reversal yet because we haven't flipped these moving averages more bullish yet. But if I was looking for a bullish pattern to buy, I would either to look to be holding above these moving averages or a little bit of a false breakdown of this level in Ripple to buy. Not sure what it's going to be, but it's definitely one that I would be stalking over all the others if I was buying a dip in a bounce if we get one next week. Ripple's one of my more favorite ones. Is Solana setting up any better? I have to say that Solana, just like Ether's at a big 61.8 retrace level, and that means from the all-time lows, which is I've got a 0 in Solana, we have a really good 61.8 fib retrace level at 112 and a really good support and resistance level. The closing swing highs in December 2023, the lows that we made in August. This is a pretty big deal level for Solana, and one of those levels where we potentially could see a little bit of a bigger bounce. So this is a weekly chart. We haven't got a 200 moving average on this chart. If we were to see a bigger bounce, if we can recover these lows from the last 2 weeks and hold above them around 125, we should get to 147.50, and potentially, because this is a big 61.8, 38.2, if we can recover 147.50, first time back I would expect a bit of a knockback, but if we can recover that, we should come up to 182 and retest these moving averages. So this is going to be a big decision level in the middle, but we could see a bigger 1, 2, 3 back to 182 in Solana, and then we would have 3 waves down, 3 waves up, and then unfortunately I would expect another swing lower still in Solana, something like this. So if you have got a big load of Solana that you are thinking you don't want to have anymore and you were looking for where it could bounce to get out, 182 would be it for me, and that, you know, is a massive bounce, 112 to 182. But just watch out for this sticky pivot level in the middle at 147.50. Now, how do we know that we are going up again in this one? At the moment, you know, if we just look at these 4 hour, we've been pretty held down underneath this trend resistance. So just like Bitcoin, we should argue that if we're making on an hourly or 4 hourly lower lows and lower highs, that we need to take out this 130 level, and then 147.50 comes into play. At the moment, we need a better bottoming pattern. We haven't quite got it yet. Now, what would a bottoming pattern look like? I think a 3-wave pullback that makes a higher low, so something like an equal measured move here, 1, 2, 3. That would be a pretty good look for Solana, or a double bottom retest if we get a nasty shakeout. Watch for this 112 level to hold as support. I'm just basically looking for a bottoming pattern here. And if this three-wave correction is complete, you know, we might not even get that bigger move lower. We could just, you know, break out from here, or breaking out above this 130 level, this important kind of trend resistance level. Again, 147.50, expect a pullback there, 3 waves, and then that would say we're on our way. For now, hourly moving averages were just flat. Might take a couple of days, but I think Solana has a really good shot at a bounce from here, and that's what I am looking at. Litecoin, which was I was pretty bullish. I have to say that I have taken that off my list for now, and I unfortunately don't think we are. Now, everything should bounce, right? But for me, I don't think that Litecoin is quite in a by the dip area. We are retesting important swing lows, right? Because these are the lows where we've been a little bit sideways at since November. We are retesting the weekly 50 moving average. That's pretty good support. We should get a pretty decent bounce from here. But again, you know, because I always rely on fibs, and if I look from the low in 2022 to this high, we're underneath this 50% level in Litecoin, which is 93.77, and underneath that weekly moving averages. I'm afraid unless we can recover this level, which is also, if I go down a time frame where our daily 200 moving averages, unfortunately the path of least resistance is lower. So I'm a big fan of false breakdowns. Holding above 93.77, I would be tempted back into Litecoin, and I would say this 5 waves lower maybe is complete, but it's looking a bit like, unfortunately, we're still headed lower until that happens. So one of the main reasons that I really kind of liked this was because of the weekly look and the holding above these weekly moving averages and this 50% from this low to high. We really kind of need to recover that for me to get excited about Litecoin again. So path of least resistance, unfortunately, this one is still lower. Somebody asked me about Fetch and the scenario in this one, and I am going to start with a weekly chart of Fetch. Now, Fetch is at one of those levels where I think that we could potentially see a bit of a bigger bounce in this one. And I'm going to talk about why in terms of fib levels and what I would need to see it be going higher. So if we, in Fetch, if we, this is Fetch AI, I'm going to put my fib levels to 0, which is like my kind of fallback if I'm not sure what's going on. Now, if I measure from the high that we made in March last year to this low here, so I measure this 5 wave down and this 3 wave correction. If I project from this high, we're at one of those 61.8 levels where we could very easily bounce. We're also at a pretty interesting level in terms of where we are from this initial opening high on this Binance chart, which you can see was really interesting support and resistance levels. So this high, which is at basically 0.498 or basically 0.5, was really important resistance. When we got above it, resistance becomes support, support becomes resistance. You can see this is a pretty interesting swing level. When I look at this, then I think that there's a potential for a bounce here and back above this newly minted weekly 200 moving average, which was support since the beginning of the year, would be a bullish reversal for me. And we could also, if we're going to look at support and resistance, let's take this level 0.7. So if we can get a bounce in everything, this back to 0.7 really, and this weekly 200 moving average is where I would have my first target. And then if we can get above and hold above that, we can talk about this being potentially a much bigger 3 wave correction complete. Now, if I measure from this high, remember when you've got 3 wave correction, you put your swings over both legs. My second target is going to be this 236 fib level up here at 1.14, and you can see very strong support and resistance there. So 0.7, holding above 0.7 gets us to 1.14, and above 1.14 we can talk about something bigger. So on lower time frames, how are we looking in Fetch in terms of a bottoming pattern? So far we've just had a very weak bounce. It's not really enough to say, oh, the bottom is in, and an awful lot of charts look like this. Haven't taken out trend resistance, looks like 3 waves moved, 3 waves up, and so we kind of do need to see a bigger bottoming pattern, a higher low, 3 wave back, something like that, and we can try another leg higher. So not quite the bottom level in Fetch, but just one of those ones where one to keep an eye on it and see if it can turn into something bigger. Another one that I am looking at is Monero. And if we go to the monthly chart of Monero, let's talk about why. So one of the reasons that I like Monero is just, for me, you know, when we look at the high that we made in 2021 on the monthly, this was a lovely big 3-wave move back. Perfect textbook kind of corrective move. And I think that potentially we've got some more upside. When you get 3 waves like this, you're looking for fibs over both swings of this correction, which I've done. And you can see that we got above this 236 fib level from this high to this low at 196.5. And this 196.5 then becomes quite interesting support. And if I go down to the daily, we could argue that, you know, we've making a very good correction, and we, having gotten above this level, are holding it now pretty nicely. We've had a decent bounce off it this week. I'm looking to see if this holds on a retest, or if we can get a kind of corrective move back and another leg higher. By corrective move back, I mean a 3-wave correction and a higher low, or a double bottom, something like that. Really, on the weekly and on the monthly, everything looks to me like we could see more upside in Monero, and this one is really kind of outperforming in terms of the pullbacks. So I'm watching this one, haven't quite got a bottom yet. When I look at the weekly moving averages, it all looks very positive. If we look at the daily, it's not so much, but they're bunched up in the middle, so any rally, of course, means we've got to get out of them. If we look at this as a channel, we could draw it like this and say we've got to really get above those daily moving averages, and not quite out of it yet, but another leg higher, then above this daily 50 and out of this channel would see next leg higher begin. So Monero is one of those really interesting levels that I've got my eye on for a bullish reversal and a buy. And if I do it and I buy some, I'll let you know, but that's what I'm watching. Good luck. We really need the kind of high tide to float all the boats for all of, you know, so many of the other altcoins and meme coins have been so badly beaten up, particularly the AI stuff. We really kind of need a rally to lift all of the boats next week if we can do it. Good luck.